All right, folks, yesterday here at the Global Hope Forums, where it ended here in Atlanta, we had a conversation with Henry Cisneros. He was, of course, the first Hispanic American to become mayor of a major American city in San Antonio, later serving as HUD Secretary under President Bill Clinton. Well, he participated in the panel talking about the issue of poverty. I caught up with him after that panel where he says this is a critical issue that must be dealt with in America right now. The panel you did dealt with the issue of poverty, and you listened to folks in D.C. talk about this, but I don't really think they have a clue about the real issue of poverty in this country.
Well, I think they have a clue we have a serious problem, but they don't know what to do about it. And the stalemate that exists in Washington today, the gridlock, the lack of money, stifles them from being able to do very much about it. We have a serious problem in America. It arose in the presidential campaign. Both President Trump and Bernie Sanders, two far sides of the spectrum, were talking about income inequality, the problem of the central cities, the problems in rural areas, the opioid problem, aging of Americans without retirement assistance, people who are sick and poor. We have a serious issue of inequality that's getting more serious, and the worst thing is going to get even more serious because the demographics pushing in favor of immigrants, people who have difficulty getting jobs, issues of new populations, children who have almost no chance to get ahead given where they are in the educational system, an aging tsunami of older Americans without health insurance. So as a country, we need to get back in the business of talking about poverty. The great thing about Operation Hope is that they're talking about putting poverty back on the national debate, putting it on the front burner, which is the right thing to do. It's been a long time since we talked about poverty in a meaningful way. And my contention would be is we can't have just the same old stale debate. We need to find new ways to talk about it because the country's changed. We have a new demographics, we have new industries, we have jobs that are changing, skills that are changing, international challenges. All of those impact what the right answers are to poverty. Rolling out some answers from the 1960s is not going to get it. Rolling out some answers from the 1930s, not going to get it. We need to be talking about new training, new forms of education, digital issues and use of technology, coming up with new answers to health care, aging strategies, if we're going to address poverty meaningfully.
This year is the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's Beyond Vietnam speech, where he blistered President Lyndon Baines Johnson, saying that the war in Vietnam was going to have a negative impact on his war on poverty. Here we now have a president who wants to spend $54 billion more on defense, wants to cut programs across the board. And so when I listen to that King speech from 50 years ago, I'm literally hearing him speaking in present day terms, saying, how can you keep wanting to spend more and more and more and more and more on planes and ships, but ignoring everyday people and their concerns?
Well, that's a very insightful recollection to make that connection. President Johnson, of course, introduced massive programs in the war on poverty related to education, related to urban renewal, related to housing, voting rights, civil rights, a whole series of strategies, health care, but the Vietnam War eclipsed a lot of that. In the present environment, President Trump has talked about doing things to deal with the divide that manifested itself in the election. But you're right, you can't build a wall, increase the funding for the Pentagon, do tax cuts, and fund a budget, and what we know is happening is the budget is not being funded. So programs that have existed for 30 years and worked, like Community Development Block Grant Program and HOME, are going to be eliminated. Educational programs are going to be cut. It is the wrong way to start a discussion about how we're going to address poverty.
How do you deal, though, with that individual, and I saw this piece, I think it was a New York Times piece, white middle-class voters who say, I'm not benefiting from entitlements, so therefore, why should my money go to pay for them? In the book Nixon Land, he talked about that the war on poverty was working until white middle-class voters said, wait a minute, too much of my money is going towards these programs, these folks are lazy, and all of a sudden, the pullback of those programs happened in the 1970s. We're sort of still there.
First of all, poverty is not a minority issue. It's not a black or brown issue. Many, many Americans who are white live in poverty, and we saw that in this last election.
Lots of red states.
In areas like Kentucky and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan and other states in the Midwest, the depths of poverty, people in conditions that are lost. A new book has been written by a man named J.D. Vance called Hillbilly Elegy, which captures the hopelessness, if you will, the despair associated with deep poverty in rural white America. So it's a problem that bridges all colors. And I would argue to people who say, I'm not affected, that we are all affected. That's not a compassionate or a humanitarian notion. It's a practical economic notion. When we have, for example, people who have to be sustained because they are incarcerated, because they don't get a decent education, we're paying twice for the education and the incarceration. When we have people who are sicker than they need to be because they can't get access to health care, and then they have to go to emergency rooms, we're paying in local budgets for emergency care. And there are countless incidents, the opportunity cost of what somebody could have contributed in the society, but instead they're going to be a burden to the society because we don't educate them, we don't provide training for them, we don't provide access to jobs. Average middle-class Americans are paying for poverty. It's better to have people pay their own way through education and empowerment than for us to pay for people who are in poverty.
When you hear the president and hear members of Congress say, let's do block grant funds, I've always believed that mayors, county judges are closer to the issue than governors. Shouldn't there be real dialogue between DC and mayors to say, wait a minute, send the money to cities as opposed to states, because the state priorities tend to be a lot different than the cities?
Well, there's no question that you want to get as close to the people as possible, because one of the things you want to do, if you want to address poverty seriously, is get away from the silos that say education, health, housing, urban renewal, etc., and they never mix and work together. So if you send the money to the local level in a block grant fashion, as we have done now for 30 years with the Community Development Block Grant Program, the Home Program, and others, you can integrate these things and make them support each other and work together, because that's what it takes to seriously address problems of poverty and urban dysfunction. But on the other hand, the money still has to come from Washington, because local governments don't have the resources to raise the capital. The most effective capital that we raise in America is through the income tax system, which is the federal government. So it needs to be a collaboration that, even though the federal government helps raise it, there is trust in state, county, and local government. And the closer we get to the people, the more likely we are to make a difference.
All right. Well, appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you again.
Let's go to Maria and Frank. This issue of poverty, obviously, is a huge one. And as I said to Cisneros, I have no confidence that folks in D.C. know what the hell they're doing.
Well, you can definitely feel that with the budget recommendations, where pretty much everything that will help uplift people is supposed to be cut, zeroed out, whatever, and all the money is supposed to go to defense. So when you brought up the Martin Luther King speech in Riverside Church, exactly 1 year to the date before he was assassinated, when he really brought up those whole issues of the war, Vietnam War, what we're spending on military, we're going right back to that area based on the proposed budget.
You know, it's interesting. You know, countries around the world that have kind of solved this problem have solved it in one area, which is education. And they believe that education is the way to rise from poverty. The problem we're having in this country is that there are many students who aren't graduating, and many of the ones that are graduating are not prepared for the workforce. So companies here are hiring outside of the country to get their workforce.
H-1B.
Subsequently, the people here in the United States aren't making the money. And it's going to continue to be a cycle until more people start to make that switch like they did in New York by providing the free college education. We have to start even with younger kids because the impressionable age are the younger ones, the 5, 6, 7-year-olds, and even the pre-K, which is expensive as hell in the United States. Why is it so expensive to educate a 4-year-old in our country?
All right, folks. Maria, Frank?
I was just going to say,
quick.
yeah, zip code determines poverty in so many ways, and you need to figure out how to lift up communities. And that's why John Hope Bryant and Operation Hope have been focused so much on the credit score and lifting communities.
All right. We appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
A peaceful protest turned deadly. 37-year-old black man was shot and killed by Baton Rouge police. His hands are in the air, and you still get shot by the cops.
Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead.
We're not going to let hate define us.
Race is a big part of this.
If truly all lives matter, then all lives need to matter equally.
What we require is action. What we require is accountability. We understand that black lives do matter, and we will keep focused on this issue.
NewsOne Now, every weekday morning at 7 on TV1.